Hey everyone, welcome to the wrap up for week 2. This week we looked at psychological research, which sets the foundation for understanding how psychology is studied, how we look at things like behaviors and mental processes, and how we try to better understand them in an effort to explain human functioning and human uh, troubles, disorders, and also human thriving. And so we use these different methods that we learned this week to help us better create a systematic way to understanding these phenomena that we see in humanity. So as we look at what we learned this week, we had 5 major topics that we looked at: the importance of research in psychology, how we use the scientific method, what research methods are available to us, ethics, and then, of course, understanding why all this matters to round it out and wrap it up. And so, if we start here with just the importance of research in psychology, there's a few different key points that I wanted to make sure you understand. First, as we talked about last week, psychology is a science. And because psychology is a science, we have to study it as a science. And to do that, we're going to use things like the scientific method to make sure that we are effectively understanding the phenomena that we're looking at. Likewise, research then also helps us understand our behaviors, thoughts, emotions, and really understand the whole of human functioning. And using research allows us to do that in a way that we can then verify and validate that what we're understanding, what we're learning, has been tested and tested again to make sure that when we report on something that our findings are as accurate as possible. And so as a researcher in psychology, it's important that we're objective, meaning that we take out our own personal biases. And so we set up parameters to make sure that we are not including our biases in the research as much as possible. Things like a double-blind study where both the researcher and the participant are unaware of who is receiving the treatment, or in this case, who would be receiving that independent variable. We also want to make sure that what we do is systematic, and this way it allows for these studies to be repeated over and over. That leads us really into what the scientific method is. And for most of us, we've learned about the scientific method all through our years of schooling, so this isn't anything new. However, one of the key points of the scientific method is actually this piece here at the bottom where it says replication. And a lot of studies or a lot of schools don't teach that important aspect of replication. Replication allows for us to repeat the essence of an original study or an earlier study using a new set of participants. The only way we can do this is if the process is standardized. And as we talked about in class, if we are not defining our variables effectively, right, that operational definition, then we don't have a set of standardized procedures, which means that we cannot replicate the study effectively. Replication allows for us to prove the results of the study valid and reliable, which are necessary and required in order for us to report on our study. Now, how do we do this, right? How can we study psychology and all these phenomena? Because there's so many different phenomena, and sometimes it's not okay to create phenomenon. And so we have different ways of doing this. We have descriptive methods where we're just simply seeking to describe the phenomenon that we're witnessing. Naturalistic observation, where we are just watching this observed phenomenon take place without interfering. Case studies, which allow us to look into what we would consider atypical things. For example, you see here on the screen an image of a rod through a brain, referring to the famous study of Phineas Gage, who received a rod through his brain as he was working on the rail. He actually survives, and for the most part was fully functional. Said there was a few personality changes and things like that, but things like that would not be ethical for us to cause to happen. So we use a case study in these cases to see the results of things that naturally occurred. And then, of course, surveys. We're all used to surveys. We receive them all the time at the end of classes, from consumer research, all of that. And all that is collecting a large amount of data to see the minds, thoughts, and opinions of other people. And we also can use a correlational study. Remember, correlation is just about identifying a relationship between two things. Correlation does not equal causation. We cannot determine causation, but it does allow for predictive validity, meaning that if I know that two things are strongly correlated, I have a better opportunity to predict with accuracy the outcomes of things when those two things are then presented. For example, if I know that study habits and grades in school are correlated, then I am able to predict that those who have better study habits are likely to have better grades in school. Lastly, our last method is experimental research. And this is the only type of study that can create or find that cause and effect. No other study can do this. So experiments are very important because we're looking for that cause and effect, right? Does A cause B? In this case, we are allowed to do this or able to do this because we're controlling for those variables, that independent and dependent variable. We're manipulating that independent variable to see the effect on that independent variable. We use things like control groups to make sure that we have something to measure against. So experimentation is really important in the study of psychology. But if we are going to engage in this type of research, we have to be ethical about doing it, which means that we have to put the people first, and so one of our big things is ensuring that anytime we propose a study that we are ethically guided. And there's some key principles that we use. The first is informed consent, meaning that the individual is aware of what they're about to experience. This doesn't necessarily mean that we tell them every aspect of the research and what we're doing, but we give them information that is enough for them to make an informed decision about participating. Then we also make sure we want to protect their information. So we ensure confidentiality by ensuring that we keep their information private. We don't use their names and stuff in the research or any identifying features. We also have an obligation to protect people from harm. We can't knowingly harm an individual. Now, can we make some discomfort occur? Yes, absolutely, as long as they're informed that there will be discomfort. But we can't harm them. Our goal is to not cause any lasting harm. Now, because we do these experiments at the end of them, it's important also to debrief the individuals. And that allows us to reduce any psychological discomfort that might have been created. And to make sure that we are on board with everything and that we are following our ethical guidelines, anytime you propose a study, it has to go before an institutional review board. And that board will look at your study and your parameters and make sure that everything lines up and that there are no ethical violations in it before you're allowed to proceed with your study. So they have a really important role in just making sure that these studies are done ethically and without harm to any type of individual. So why does this all matter? Well, research allows psychology to be a credible field. It's an evidence-based field, right? It shows that we are a science, okay? It allows us to think critically, apply our findings to our real life, and most importantly, it allows us to stay curious and ask questions about psychological studies. We don't want to just take things at face value. We want to make sure that we are considering all the factors, that we are doing our due diligence and our research to understand these studies. And the more we do this, the better we're going to be able to understand psychological phenomena as they come about. So I hope this helps you a little bit. I hope that you gained a little bit of knowledge and highlighted some of these key factors. Most importantly, I hope that you can start thinking ahead as to how the findings of psychology have been studied and understood and made so that we can repeat them, replicate them, validate them, make sure they're reliable before we publish them. And also, I want to challenge you and encourage you to try to apply some of the findings of psychology to your life and consider how you are affected by the outcomes of these studies. So I hope you had a good time on this video, and I look forward to talking with you again. See you later.